Hi guys, welcome to our webinar today. The theme of today that we're going to unpack for everyone is the theme of summer movement. So to introduce myself, my name's Sam, I'm from Bench. And I'm usually one of the people that speaks at our events, so I'm pretty sure everyone's going to be happy to hear from some other people for a change, which would be nice. Before meeting who those other people are, I'll just touch on why we're here today. So I won't harp on about it too much by any stretch, but as we know, it's been a pretty unique and a pretty challenging year in a number of different ways. That, however, will not be our focus for today's content in the slightest. What we really want to do is to have you guys walk away from this event with a real understanding of some of the insights that have been uncovered over the past 6 months or so, and how to use these insights to leverage different media opportunities throughout the summer. So this summer, as mentioned, is shaping up to be one of the most unique in our history, which really can allow marketers to get an edge towards the back end of this year and also get that momentum into next year. So before we get into it, it's a fully live webinar, so we'll provide the opportunity for people to ask questions throughout to our panel and to myself. And if there's anything that we don't get to today, we'll be in touch afterwards to ensure that we cover everything off for you all. Feel free to use that Q&A section just at the bottom of your screen there. Now, I'm lucky enough to work with all of these people here today in a number of different capacities, and I'm really excited that they're going to be able to share some of their expert opinions with you all. What I'll do is I'll just go around the room for a quick meet and greet. Might start with you, Artie. If you could just introduce yourself, introduce your company, maybe just give everyone that really top level insight into what geolocation data is.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Artie. I'm actually the RVP for agencies and partner relationships here at Foursquare. And for those of you who don't know, Foursquare is a data-specific company for location data, and geolocation in its true definition is the identification of geographic location of a user or a device. But in terms of the world of advertising, it actually means a lot more than just understanding where a user is. It actually understanding how people really move in the real world, and what is their true intent, and essentially showing what real world behavior is in the world.
Great, thanks for that, Artie. Next up, we've got Braden. Same deal, Braden. If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, and maybe for you, give the listeners a bit of a top line on what programmatic digital out of home is.
Yeah, sure thing. Hi everyone, I'm Braden Clark from Val Morgan Outdoor, VMO. So I'm a programmatic director at VMO, joined at the beginning of the year. VMO are a leading out-of-home, digital out-of-home network. So we've got over 10,000 digital screens across retail, convenience retail and gyms environments in Australia, and also office networks in New Zealand. My role is really around the real-time trading of out-of-home inventory. So programmatic capabilities is a fairly recent addition to the out-of-home space, and now allows advertisers to buy their activity in real time. So it's really bringing a new lens of kind of efficiency and data activation to the out-of-home space.
Amazing. And then finally, we've got Esther Carlson. Same please, if you could just give us a quick introduction and insight into Bench and your role at Bench.
Sure. So hi everyone, I'm Esther Carlson. I'm the commercial director at Bench, and I suppose a bit of background on Bench is we're a programmatic enablement business. So we work with agencies and brands, and we work with them on their programmatic and digital planning, strategy, activation, analytics, the whole sort of gamut.
Awesome. Thanks, E. So we have spent some time compiling some very broad observations to use as discussion points throughout the next 45 minutes or so. The observations are an extremely macro view of some of the recent societal and media trends, some of which are here to stay, and others which will probably be a little bit more dynamic. Either way, they all very much impact the way that we look at media buying strategy. So these wonderful people that we've curated here to provide you all with insights and opportunities are each able to come with their own unique angle based on their area of expertise. Now, those observations are, first of all, very broadly, that more people are working from home, and that has an effect on our movement behaviours. Second of all, Australia will be full of Australians this summer, which is providing one of the most unique summer periods that I think we've seen in our recent past, and probably further to that, our distant past as well. We're going to see that some categories are up, some categories are down, and we'll provide some insight around how to navigate that. And then also a complete understanding of the fact that measurement is key to understanding the value of your media investment. So what I might do to kick off straight away is just throw over to Esther to give a bit of a macro view of what she's seeing from a bench perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So I think, it's safe to say that working from home has become a big thing this year, given the fact that most of us have been forced to spend the majority of the year working from home. And whilst businesses are returning to the office, and most are, some still aren't, but as most are migrating back to the office, I think it's safe to say that working from home has become a necessity for businesses to provide for employees. I know that when we did a survey at Bench, when we were returning to the office a couple of weeks ago, that it was a unanimous kind of insight from everybody that they wanted greater flexibility on working from home. So, that means that for Bench, we've got a number of teams that are spending, up to 2 or 3 days at home. I think we've all proven that we can do it, that businesses don't fall apart when we do it. And so therefore it's really starting to be woven into businesses' future plans. And so as a result, working from home doesn't feel like it's really going anywhere anytime soon. So from a marketer's perspective, there's two kind of big things, and you've touched on it already a little bit, Sam, that I see as really impacting marketing plans. One of that is around movement changes and movement and consumer behavior and movement patterns, and the other is media consumption. From a movement perspective, obviously the very first thing that we think of is around the daily commute. And if you have marketing plans that you're targeting those peak periods in the morning and the evening, whether people are going back to the office but still working from home, there's going to be a disruption in that space. We are no longer en masse going to be traveling to and from work the way that we were before. And so I think, understanding that in relation to marketing is really important, and will disrupt a lot of the most basic targeting that we do in programmatic around time of day and day of week targeting. You think about it as well, think about yourself, you're spending more time in your local community. It's generally disrupting your movement patterns across the board. If you think about your exercising, the activities that you're doing the day, your media consumption, even to the point where, Nielsen have found that people who work from home, over 50% of people apparently go to bed later and get up later, which also disrupts media consumption. You start, in the future, we might start looking around, what was traditionally peak periods and traditionally prime time, is that changing? And so we're kind of spending a lot of time with clients at the moment, really trying to understand their current strategies and their audience type, and trying to understand and working with partners like Foursquare to really understand what that impact is and what that means from a campaign strategy and optimization perspective. And I know Artie and Braden, you'll have a lot of information around specifically what's happening in Australia and the movement changes that we've been seeing. That will continue to change over the coming months as restrictions lift, etc. The second one, which I think I'll dive in a little bit more details around the media consumption changes. And I think, it goes without saying that it's pretty well documented that people are spending more time online. Internet usage is up. But what's interesting is that people are consuming their traditional media channels and much more digitally. And we're kind of seeing that across the board, across many channels, really. I mean, obviously social, it goes without saying, is booming. I think that's pretty well known. We've seen sort of native really come into its own. So we've seen an uptick in demand for native, given the fact that consumers are consuming news content more and doing it at different times, and actually surprisingly on desktop away from mobile in some instances. So when at home, I think audio is a really interesting one, because audio streaming service apparently are our most favorite thing to do when we're working from home, whether that's podcasting, music, or listening to the radio. And so again, that for me feels like a real sort of untapped opportunity for some marketers around being able to reach the consumer throughout the day, whereas before, and at an individual level, which maybe wasn't possible before. And then I think kind of the really sort of big one is BVOD. We've seen in Australia a 25% increase year on year of connected TV. I think, you look at any of the broadcasters in Australia and they've documented that they've seen a huge sort of increase around digital watching of their services via apps and connected TVs. And I think with that creates its own kind of interesting kind of shift. particularly from an advertising perspective. As we've seen that sort of supply increase over the period, it means that the barriers to entry for TV have sort of lowered. And we have seen a number of clients that weren't using BVOD before, hadn't trialed BVOD before, really starting to lean into that space. And you know, you look at the results from Roku and the Trade Desk that have happened over the last week. It's a trend that they pull out in their as driving growth for them. This kind of first-time advertiser numbers are increasing, and it feels that, you know, that kind of the ability of programmatic TV to no locking contracts, you know, and trying to and basically because the audience is there and the frequency of the audience is there, really starting to come into its own with regards to reach and efficiency around buying. I mean, we've got a finance client with Bench that we've traditionally worked at the sort of engagement layer and the real sort of driving leads for them. But they've done, you know, realizing the opportunity that their audience was online and there was a huge increase in BVOD. They trialed BVOD for the first time, and because they're able to see the impact that BVOD has had and what they were doing previously, you know, that impact is so much so that they're now rolling that across. It started on savings and it's rolling into home loans and so on. So that's kind of a first-time advertiser perspective. And then I think what's also interesting is, and it's something that we're seeing with a lot of our clients, is that, you know, for existing clients that are using BVOD, there's changes in strategies that we've implemented. You know, previously we had a retailer who was offline actually and is back online now that restrictions are lifted. But these guys have a sort of a high frequency strategy. And prior to the growth that this space has seen, we were really hyper local targeting in order to drive up that frequency. But because there's a bigger audience and because they're coming back more often, the ability to reach higher frequencies is easier. And so we've switched that strategy and are now actually doing sequential messaging. And so we're able to sort of really implement more creative and complex kind of strategies to that approach, which means they're able to take the consumer through the journey. Rather than focusing and optimizing to frequency, we're optimizing in a different way. And then I think the other big thing to notice for existing clients is that, you know, the beauty of programmatic is based on supply and demand. I think, you know, over the past 6 months with supply going up, it's really enabled us to drive more effective reach for our clients. And we've seen improvements of 10-15% across the board, which meant that trial and people starting to trial, it was the tipping point in order to start seeing money flow into that space. So it's interesting. It's kind of, you know, it's almost democratizing TV. You know, it's really starting to provide it as a channel open to clients that maybe hadn't tried it before. And again, you know, also just the fact that the reach and the audience is there means that as a channel, it's really sort of coming into its own.
No, totally agreed. Obviously, whilst not being representative of an entire population by any stretch, and I imagine most listeners here could personally feel the effects of working from home on their day-to-day lives, and as well as that, their own personal shifts in media consumption. And when I think about that personally, I definitely go into moving into the fact that I'm streaming much more audio and I'm streaming much more TV-based content than I have before. When you throw in all of the digital side of things that we can do in terms of understanding data points, then understanding how different channels can start to affect each other on a media plan, that starts to throw a whole bunch more value behind it, in my opinion. But Artie, with such a unique view on and insight into our changes in those movement patterns, what can you kind of share with us about how you would apply that to marketing strategy?
Yeah, 100%. So like just echoing a lot of what you've been saying, I mean, working from home is definitely something that's here to stay. You know, and actually what we've seen is a shift in behavior, right? So one thing I would say is like Foursquare, because it's a data company, actually our data is available across the entire ecosystem. And kind of what you were talking about before, what we're seeing is brands are now starting to tap into using our data across different platforms. So it's no longer just about using us just on digital display. It's like, as we see, we've seen the rise of using our data on like CTV, on audio, on, you know, multiple other things. Like they're getting a lot more creative in terms of how they can actually take this data out to market and actually tap into these audiences, which is great. But I think with, you know, with more eyes on these digital platforms, like brands and agencies do need to start thinking about like, you know, how do I engage with this user now, knowing that there's probably going to be a higher chance they're on CTV, on social platforms, on audio, etc. And what does that messaging really like? How do we really resonate that messaging to them? Because if you think about what we've done here at Foursquare, is we've understood that once upon a time, so pre-COVID world, we were all out and about. We were all in our very daily routine that we would get up, we'd go to work, we would do our hours at work, we'd come back home, etc. But now it's like, as you mentioned, it's all been disrupted. So what we're actually doing is we're really building strategies for brands that's actually looking at all that historical data, which is really important because you may not have actually changed as a person, i.e. you're probably still someone who has a passion for what you had a passion for pre-COVID, but you're just probably doing it a little bit differently now. And that's what we're really helping brands do. So we're taking like that historical data that we have about how people move in the real world and how people were moving in the real world, and then looking at how they are moving in the real world today. And just to kind of harp on the fitness example that you mentioned as well, that's like a perfect one, because what we've actually seen is users who are generally what we would call a fitness enthusiast are still fitness enthusiasts, but maybe how they're doing that is different. So historically, yes, they would have been people who've been seen going to gyms, going to healthy places to eat, etc. Now what we're seeing is there has been a rise of people are actually running a lot more than they ever used to be. People are actually working out from home more than so. So actually what we're seeing is like, you know, that's really affected like the gyms in terms of like how many people, etc. are going to the gyms, or maybe they're being restricted on how many people can go to the gyms because of social distancing. So you're still a fitness enthusiast, but what we're doing is we're using the fact that we could see that you were a fitness enthusiast. Now that we know that, okay, you're a fitness enthusiast in today's world, but maybe you're just not going to the gym as much as you used to. Maybe now you're just running a lot more. Maybe now you're just actually working out from home a lot more. So actually then the messaging from, you know, whether it be a sports brand or a fitness brand of some sort, you need to start thinking about, well, it's still the same user that I need to be approaching. It's just, how do I now speak to that person in today's world?
Yeah, you know, this is fantastically controversial straight off the bat, Braden. As working for a mediator with screens in fitness centres, I'm sure you've got some things to provide in terms of how things have shifted and how to apply that in planning media.
Yeah, no, definitely. And the health and fitness and the gym space has been a you know, pretty fascinating use case, definitely, with, you know, this kind of multi-speed recovery that we've seen with different lockdowns and different closures in different states across Australia, and even, you know, in New Zealand as well, where we've also got media. You know, we've seen some really different trends across the different markets. So if we look, break down some examples by state. So example you can see in front of you here is looking at traffic trends across our Victorian and New South Wales gyms. Just a bit of background on this data as well. Part of the VMO data offering is a platform called DART. Essentially, it's camera-based measurement that's integrated with our panels. So we're able to see the footfall, the dwell time, the engagement of people that are walking past screens, and it gives us really valuable real-time insight into what's happening across the network. So we've kind of compared New South Wales as probably the highest speed recovery in this health and fitness area, with Victoria being the laggard with its additional lockdowns. So what you see here is the traffic, with New South Wales in blue and Victoria in the bronze. And the dotted lines represent the baseline traffic levels, so kind of plus or minus 10% from the usual traffic levels we see. So you can see that in March, when the gyms closed, we saw that rapid drop off to near zero. Still a few staff walking around in there, so you can see a bit of traffic there. And when the lockdowns rolled back in June, you can see there was quite a quick recovery across both markets. So kind of reaching baseline within a week. Obviously, Victoria then had the kind of additional and longer lockdown period, which you can see that period of lower traffic from July coming through until Monday. So this chart runs up until Monday, and so you can just see that spike of activity starting to come through for Victoria. So it's a really seeing kind of a multi-speed recovery in different verticals and in different geos across the nation, which are pretty interesting. So if we look into that further, this chart then breaks down the post-lockdown or post-reopening recovery. So in the gold at the top, you've got New South Wales showing the recovery after the phase 1 closures. So as you mentioned, kind of reaching normalised traffic range after day 3. And in the first lockdown for Victoria, which is the dark blue, we also saw a day 3 reaching normalised traffic. Off the first day of traffic that we have from the second lockdown, we've seen double the audience recovery. So people are really bouncing back really quickly in Vic in terms of their gyms behaviour. And we know from a couple of our gyms partners at Fitness First and Good Life, for example, they've actually booked out 100% of their fitness classes for the week already, and that was on yesterday. So obviously those are classes that are operating at those reduced COVID safe levels. So we are seeing those different traffic patterns, but yeah, definitely seeing some really interesting recovery trends, particularly in the New South Wales market.
Particularly people bouncing back with all the extra kilos they're carrying, right?
That's it. Got to get rid of those COVID kilos.
Yeah. there's a rush to gyms.
Yeah, that's right. And then, as I mentioned, we've also got an office tower network in New Zealand, and so that's given us some really interesting insights from a market that's had a different recovery trajectory. Lower community transmission cases, but some more severe periods of lockdown. And so you can see here, again, those dashed lines represent the normalised traffic range. And so you can see the kind of different trajectory here with each lockdown. So you had the first initial lockdown in March, April. And we saw around a 20-day period. After around 20 days from the reopening, we reached around a minus 40% average weekly traffic. After the second lockdown, if you look post 20 days, we'd actually gotten way back up into normalised traffic. So it's an interesting kind of, I guess, case study from a market with that different recovery trajectory around how people are bouncing back more quickly, people, I guess, getting more resilient. And so, we're kind of expecting to see similar trajectories across the Australian market. So it definitely ties into that whole working from home story, but we are seeing people start to venture out more. And even if you look at the Google mobility data for Australia for workplaces, for example, you actually only see 3 states that are currently showing below baseline. So you've got New South Wales at minus 8%, Queensland at minus 1%, Victoria at minus 26%. But if you look at the other states, you've got South Australia and ACT up 2%, Tasmania's up 9%, NT's up over 20%. So it really is that multi-speed recovery, and I guess it tells that story that a kind of one-size-fits-all approach doesn't really work in this quickly changing and highly kind of granular environment.
Thanks, guys.
It's actually really interesting, just before you move on, I think the fact that you were saying, Artie, around the historical data, I think, in programmatic, particularly in digital, we're always looking at the look back windows of a certain amount of time to determine behavior. I think the fact that we're kind of flipping that on its head and kind of having to use historical data is a big shift in the way that we've been thinking. And to your point as well, Braden, I think we're seeing that as well. I think where we've traditionally run campaigns nationally, we're starting now to look at different strategies and different optimization strategies by state, because everyone's in a very different kind of position, and it's really clear when you look at it that granular. So yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, that's right. And even as well, from a kind of metro versus regional perspective, obviously seeing some pretty interesting variations there, and quicker recovery paths in some of those suburban and regional centres, whereas some of those metro CBD areas are lagging behind.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So, go on, Artie.
No, I was just gonna, I was gonna say, I was just gonna, just going off back of Braden's comment, but absolutely, it's an opportunity to start. You can start seeing things like football trends of when markets are starting to pick back up, and it's that opportunity that as long as you're keeping your eyes on that region, because as we're talking about doing that, things are just not the same state by state or region by region. So what brands really should be thinking about is, as they're starting to see that movement is happening within the region, it's obviously a true indication to say that it's coming back into recovery. So they should be thinking about, like, okay, well, what's my quick plan to market and action point right now?
Yeah, and this is it, right? It's like you're not waiting for a study to come out 3 months later to tell you what consumers were doing back 3 months ago and then what they think. And there's not projections. It's actually, this is happening right now. And that's where programmatic really comes into its own, because you're able to shift stuff around and be really fluid and be able to be more reactionary, which I think is really positive as well.
Very good. I might move us on to observation number 2 now, guys. And when we're talking about observation number 2, what we're really talking about is the fact that we're going to have quite a unique summer ahead, which kind of ties in nicely to some of the really unique points that we're uncovering in terms of movement and media consumption. Personally, again, I'm a bit of a testament to this. Last year I was not in the country for Christmas. This year I will be, and I'll be traveling domestically. So super interesting. So when looking at the year that was, where do we think those opportunities now sit for brands as we're looking into the sort of late summer period or late December period and into January?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting one, actually, because you're right. Like, Australia's going to be full of Australians, I think you said at the beginning. And it is, right. We are certainly not gallivanting around the globe and spending our money in other countries. You know, there will be a certain, for those that can, there'll be domestic travel that are happening into states. There's a real sort of, obviously over the Christmas period, people will be traveling within states, going on staycations, spending time with family and friends. And whilst consumer spending, you know, isn't back up to where it was pre-COVID, it's still certainly improving. And there is discretionary expenditure there and up for grabs for marketers, really. You know, what I think is really interesting about a lot of this stuff is that even when you think back to the bushfires, Australians, it came out kind of loud and clear that Australians were really wanting to support their local communities, wanting to support local businesses and have a real sort of high affinity for Australian brands. And I think what's happened over the last year has even further cemented that, you know. So I think people, whilst they're spending less, are spending it more carefully and are more attuned to where they want to put their dollar. If you think about all of the tourism, local tourism advertising that happened after the bushfires and stuff, it's kind of really cementing what I think has been a real sort of community spirit. When you look at the sort of Christmas period as well, apparently only 4% of Australians are not going to be sending gifts this year, which means that 96% of us will be. And apparently 60% of us haven't even thought about it yet. And I know I think I fall into that category. So I do think that there's a real sort of opportunity there to still be able to influence consumers. And, you know, you look at the sort of the categories where people are spending money. Yes, there's grocery buying, whether it be online or in bricks and mortar stores. And yes, there's liquor and alcohol, which I'm sure will continue over the Christmas period. Local cleaning companies, delivery services. But there's things all around, you know, it's well documented that people are baking, people are checking recipes online, coffee subscriptions, gardening, barbecues, retail, and renovating and fashion. So it's kind of, you know, there's recovery happening across the board. And I think given the fact that combined with the fact that we know that people are online more, and that you now have a number of different channels that maybe you weren't trialing before that enables you to talk to consumers in more touch points and influence more, then I think there's a real opportunity on lead up to Christmas and also over the summer months for marketers to really kind of harness that.
Yeah, agreed. Just to follow on from that very broadly, what approach should marketers take? Braden, I'll throw this one over to you.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting Christmas, definitely. So we have done a bit of a look at you know, the modelling of inbound and outbound overseas passenger movement, and as you mentioned, there's going to be a lot more Australians here. There's, you know, going to be over 600,000 net more people here, and that's going to be less overseas tourists and more Australians who, as you said, traditionally might have gone overseas. So it does kind of change the, you know, the profile of the market. You know, we're forecasting a lot more domestic travel. Again, using those Google search trends as an indicator. Searches for caravans, trailers, that type of thing are up 600% year on year, and particularly across the eastern seaboard. So people are looking for those alternatives, travel alternatives. So they're going to be on the road. We've also seen from recent surveys that we've done that people are like road tripping and local travel is really coming up quite heavily in terms of intent over the summer period. So yeah, we did run a survey that ran a couple of weeks ago, and it was of around 600 people. And so some of the insights that we got out of that in terms of Christmas and summer patterns. So we still have a third of those shoppers that still tell us they shop often throughout the week. So even, and this is a national view, so even, you know, throughout this pandemic, there's still a third that are, you know, going out to the shops often and are out and about. We know that 71% plan to increase the amount of road trips and travel that they take locally. And then we have 85% plan to increase their keeping fit and exercising. So again, kind of working off those COVID kilos. And then in terms of the time frame to Christmas, as you mentioned, Esther, a lot of people aren't really thinking yet about their Christmas shopping. They're still kind of working through the process there. So we saw over 50% planning to do their Christmas shopping 3 to 4 weeks out from Christmas. So, you know, those guys are about to hit the shops, and so it's still a really effective time to be able to influence that traffic. And then, you know, areas where we're seeing declines, we're seeing 39% that plan to decrease their shopping in the CBD and at larger shopping centres. So again, that ties into, you know, some of those increases in local traffic and shopping online and whatnot. So from a marketer perspective, I think it's, you know, thinking about those different strategies for regional activation. You know, where are you running your ads? And again, getting access to the most real-time data that you have around movement patterns to influence your buying. And today, you know, one of the few things we can say thanks to the pandemic for, you have even the likes of Apple and Google providing mobility data at a, you know, you can get really granular data for free online, and even that can help to influence your planning and your strategies.
I think that's awesome in terms of having a look at how you could use that data and that insights from a retail vertical perspective. Kind of leads us nicely into that third observation around other categories, so some being up, some being down, some really thriving and others struggling a little bit or on the road to recovery. Artie, I understand you guys have put together some data that looks at different categories and how foot traffic has affected it and how they're looking in terms of recovery.
Yeah, so kind of keeping in line with obviously the festive season for Australia as well, we particularly looked at 4 different categories. One was bars, restaurants, groceries, and hotels, essentially. And it's really interesting because if you look at, let's say, the restaurants category, for instance, what we're starting to see in the restaurants category is actually it's starting to recover, which is a great sign, because actually what that means, and it ties really nicely into what everyone's saying, is what we're seeing is people are starting to dine out more, but they're dining, but it's very much local dining. So it's really supporting like that local community that we are seeing. That's what's happening in that world there. So it's a great chance for, you know, that local pasta or Italian that you've always kind of never really end up going to. This is their time to obviously start thriving and actually making sure that they're getting you in for Christmas. Hotels as well. I mean, hotels have also starting to slowly recover. But that's very much due to a change in strategy from their end. So more people are, you know, going to be doing staycations. It wasn't a thing, you know, this time last year for you guys, whereas it definitely is going to be a thing. I mean, there are hotels that are claiming that they are now actually fully booked already. Grocery stores, on the other hand, to be honest, they're still a little bit flat. In comparison, so they're still about 20%, so they're very stable, but they're still 20% down on footfall in comparison to pre-COVID. And so again, I think that backs up to the notion that maybe people are just going into their local stores, or maybe actually people are adapted to more online shopping, especially for like grocery shopping. And and that could be like a generational thing. I think there's a thing where, you know, the older generations would still like to go into the grocery stores, etc. But now they've adapted to doing online shopping. They probably learned over this lockdown period that, you know, it's maybe an easier way for them to do this.
My mum and dad have definitely done that.
But and then interestingly, things like bars and nightlife, that's still 50% down. And so what we believe is that people are still very cautious, and they're still actually keeping social distancing at hand. And so, yeah, there's going to be definitely more drinking at home, more partying at home. So, you know, make sure all those alcohol brands out there are thinking about how do I get people into festive motion at home. But kind of what you were saying before, the brands that are really or like, should I say, the industries that are thriving, or what we're seeing, is definitely like your local cleaning companies, delivery services, coffee subscriptions are up. Also gaming, the gaming markets. So people were actually buying more games than ever before, and they're selling more games than ever before. Gardening and barbecues look like that's the other big thing that's going to be rising in the next few months. Bread baking, I think there's going to be a lot of that happening too. Furniture stores have also seen a huge rise in footfall. So I think a lot of people are doing that whole DIY, getting things in order, etc. And now that they have the time to do that, there's probably loads of things that we just never do when we're working 9 to 5 in an office. And one of my favorite industries, actually, which I'm calling the puppy pandemic, is actually more than ever before. More people are now buying pets. And so what we're actually working with a particular pet store in Australia, a big pet store in Australia, and they're using our data in really innovative ways during this time, because they're actually taking advantage of the fact that there's been this boom of people who've been buying pets, or especially puppies, over the last few months. And so they have the opportunity to sell more goods than ever before. But interestingly, the people who are now coming into their store are also very different to the people who used to come into their store, because the people who have obviously bought pets during this period of time, especially during the lockdown period of time, or just post, is basically a very different person, i.e., I mean, myself included, like, I might not, if this was me this time last year, it would always be like, oh, don't I get a pet? But then I ended up getting one, because now I'm like, oh, actually, now I do have the freedom to have one. So all of a sudden they're seeing this whole new consumer that's coming in and out of their stores. And actually they're really using that data to understand more about who their users now are. How often do they come into the store? How do they even start continuously build that story and brand loyalty with them using that data? But then ultimately what they're also doing, which is really clever, is because they're using a whole array of media, like they're using audio, desktop, out of home, they're using a whole different bunch of things. What they're really trying to understand is what media mix is actually driving that footfall in. So not how many people are coming in, but what's the mix of media that's coming in. And I think that's where it's starting to get really interesting for them, because they're just doing something that's a bit more innovative in market.
Excellent. Is anyone here? Go on, Esther.
All I was going to say on that is interesting, actually, that when you're looking at the stats that you're showing around restaurants and so on, and recovery, I suppose, again, just to call it out, that would probably be very different if you, because this is a national view. Yeah. I'm sure if you look by state, right, there would be different. It would probably be quite different by state, which is what we said earlier. But particularly given like restrictions and stuff, you know, I mean, it's all very anecdotal, but at the same time, from my perspective, not from yours, but you know, you just have to think around, but how the different states are socializing in different ways. And I think people are chomping at the bit to get back out there, but at the same time, from a national perspective, Victoria will have been really sort of, I would have thought, been really skewing those results a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is obviously looking at Australia as a whole, but yes, like the data sets can be obviously driven down into regional level. And actually, you're right. marketers should be thinking about, how do I talk to the
Different
individual
strategies, yeah.
and building the strategies around that.
Yeah, and from trying to jump in there from a VMO perspective, and particularly across the retail space, we've definitely seen, like much like we saw in gyms, that kind of multi-speed recovery across the different markets, even to the extent where when we look at a national picture now, we have been looking at national excluding Victoria, and then we compare Victoria. So what we've done here, I'll kind of talk you through this chart because there's a lot of squiggly lines on it. But what we've done is we've taken our first party data around traffic and visitation across retail areas, and we've overlaid that with the Google mobility data at a national level to try and kind of tell a consolidated picture. So kind of talk through the charts top to bottom. The dashed yellow line that you see up the top, over-indexing across the whole period, is obviously residential from Google mobility studies. So again, just telling that story that people are at home a lot more. You can see that peaked in April though, and has been on a consistent downward trend towards baseline over that period. In the dotted red, we've got Google's mobility data on grocery and pharmacy. So remained fairly close to baseline since around the May-June period. A bit of a dip in August when we saw resurgence in cases and local transmissions and whatnot, and then heading up towards baseline. Then in the solid colours, you've got our first-party VMO data from our Dart facial analytics. In light blue, you've got essential essential screens. So essentially, those are the screens that are within direct proximity to essential services, so your supermarkets, your pharmacies, etc. So you can see, again, quite a rapid recovery path, when you take Victoria out of the mix, and now even accelerating above baseline.
Mm-hmm.
Light green, you've got convenience, retail and petrol stations, and a very similar trajectory to the essential side of things. And then going down further, you see the purple or the pink line there, which is general retail. So those are our screens that aren't within direct proximity to the essential services. And so obviously a lot more heavily impacted, but quite a steeper recovery trajectory. Yeah. And then drawing up the bottom, you've got the transit, which is still obviously that dashed grey line, which is still very low. So it's quite an interesting picture. Once you take Victoria out of the mix, you really see that recovery writ large. And then if we look here, drilling into those retail verticals at the actual comparison of the national view, excluding Victoria versus Victoria, in essential retail, you can see national in the blue again, and Victoria in the gold or bronze, whatever you want to call it. But so essential services, essential screens in Victoria are actually now accelerating ahead of typical benchmarks now that the lockdowns are being rolled back. Same for general retail, is actually massively spiked above the national view, whereas convenience, retail and petrol hasn't spiked back yet. People's petrol tanks are still full from that 5 kilometre lockdown. But I guess it just shows again that if you thought Victoria was back, if you look over the last couple of weeks in some areas, it's actually ahead of baseline. So again, that kind of nuanced view is getting more and more important.
And that's, again, just to harp on about it, but that's where programmatic comes into its own as well, right? Because not only are you able to do, you're obviously able to do your different strategies within different states, etc., but you're able to really be looking at this data in real time and making changes as we see that recovery. Yeah, it's interesting.
The real ability to be reactive to the insights, I think, is what's important, rather than being locked into sort of contracts or plans with different media owners at different channels. The ability to be able to move those budgets around, change things on the fly, and really take on board these insights is kind of, for me, what really stacks up throughout this whole period, as well as moving forward. And we can see with all of the technological capabilities that are happening in the market, it's programmatic. I could almost see the word programmatic dying off, and it's just going to be the way that we buy media with all of the data and all the technology that we've got available to us. And what kind of is key, kind of again leading us into that fourth observation, what's kind of nice and key to investing in this space and to applying these insights is really the measurement off the back of it, to be able to prove the value of that media activity or that media that you're purchasing. I guess there's many different ways to look at measurement. I might throw over to you, Artie, because you've got quite a unique view on how to look at measurement specifically as well when looking at offline to online, online to offline, which is super important and being done with more gusto at the minute.
Yeah, it's the whole attribution piece is a minefield, first of all. But we've recently rolled out an attribution product in market, which has like just been testing and it's been doing very, very well. But I think there's a couple of things to really note as a brand or marketer when you're thinking about attribution in today's world. First thing is like, don't compare your results to this time last year. We do live in a different world now, and you have to understand that you can't just be going in going, oh, well, we made X amount of people came into our store last year, and what's the comparison? Are we up or down? I mean, we live in a different place now, so therefore we shouldn't be doing that at all. But what we should be thinking about is innovation, and we should be thinking about actually how do we get these products to work that much harder for us than ever before. And we should also be thinking about things like, what methodologies were we using and were they the right ones? You know, a lot of the attribution solutions out in market today are all based on first touch or last touch, and they're not really thinking about that journey that we're talking about today, right? So we're talking that a user is at home, they've been exposed to several different messaging from your brand throughout the day, but the only one that would get an attribution would be maybe the first one they heard or maybe the last one they saw. Like, that's ridiculous. What we should be thinking about is what mix of media is actually helping us drive or put that brand into the person's head that's driving footfall into the store. So, for instance, does audio and seeing a display ad, is that, you know, regardless of order, but like, is audio and display more effective than, let's say, CTV by itself or social by itself? How do we move away from building these lovely fancy reports at the end of the campaign, but let's face it, no one cares, the campaign's finished.
I think that how part is quite interesting, right? I know I've definitely been working in this industry for a while, and I've found it very difficult to move away from that last touch drug that a lot of brands and agencies seem to work on. What advice do you have for marketers that are trying to reassess it? Like, how do you do it?
I mean, use our attribution product. No, but that is actually what we're doing. That is actually how we are taking things into market. So we're actually educating the market about not thinking about, you know, this last touch first touch attribution model. We're actually talking to them about, think about it as a tool that helps you really optimize your campaign during its flight period, right? So what media mix is working for you at that moment in time? And then let's start moving budgets and monetary around so that before we get to the end of the campaign, you already know this data, you already know this information because it's coming to you in real time anyway. So there's no reason why we should be waiting until the end before we get the results and then build a fancy report. We should be thinking about how do we use this data that's coming in real time and optimizing to get the best results at the end. And within that, it's all about what media mix is playing best to our campaign, to our needs. And, you know, that gets really, you get very, very granular with that because you can get down to like regional level, states level, like maybe what's working over here is different to what's working over here. But that's the beauty of programmatic, is you just optimize accordingly.
Awesome. So very much throwing last year's data out the window, reassessing based on what we're seeing and applying these insights, probably where you can get a nice start in terms of how to understand the value of the media mix. Esther, any insight?
I was just going to quickly add to what Artie's saying, talking about sort of, yes, I think this trend that we've seen over the last 12 months is that clients are really leaning into attribution, trying to get a much better handle on their data. I think the depreciation of the cookie is making sure that there's a more urgency than there ever has been before for marketers to really understand their data assets, what they have, and the value that they have. So I would just say from a trend from us around this is that, you know, our job really is to lean in with our clients around really understanding what their data strategy is and trying to activate and make sense of the data that they're pushing to us so that we're able to really provide data back to them in a structured way so that they can start analyzing impact. So it's all great having a data strategy here and investing in a whole heap of, you know, a DMP or whatever it is that clients are doing, or attribution partners. But it's really about dovetailing that into your media strategy so that one is really kind of feeding the other. And I think, you know, there's an enormous amount of value around being able to do that. And I think that's one thing that I've seen, that we've spent a lot of time over the last few months really trying to understand how we can activate the data strategy that our clients are doing and really create that fluidity that we're able to do, to your point, Artie, around as you're learning and doing attribution, multi-touch attribution throughout campaigns, being able to action that off the back of and doing that in real time. I think that's a kind of a key thing that we're seeing at the moment, and one that we're fully embedded with a number of our clients on.
Yeah, for sure. And for brands and marketers that haven't really given much thought to their own first-party data strategy, I would heavily encourage to start thinking about it. I think, Esther, you just touched on it before, but the deprecation of the third-party cookie is going to be super impactful in the way that we look at measurement moving forward. So when we're talking about some of these location-based attribution points, we're not talking about anything cookie-related whatsoever. So we're kind of safe, future-proofing ourselves moving forward for how we could look at attribution in a different way and in a smarter way and in a more impactful way that's very much in line with how the industry is progressing in terms of data privacy and security. But Braden, I might throw to you. The programmatic digital out-of-home industry has come an extremely long way in a very, very, very short amount of time. And you can kind of look at measurement in a couple of different ways there, because you've got measurement around screens in terms of understanding the audience that's there. You've got measurement in terms of using mobile as a connector. You've got measurement in terms of brand impact and the effect that has on sales. Go, what can you tell us?
Oh yeah, it's a big topic.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think as you said, programmatic outdoor has come a long way, and it's been a massive step change in the way that the media can be bought and sold, and not just a weekly tendency, for example, but buying in real time, picking the screens and sites that you want and the times of day, and potentially overlaying other data sets. So I think there's that step change for us. There was a bunch of kind of basic hygiene, where now that people can buy based on a specific time of day and hour and all of those types of things, we need to have really granular data to support that. So we need to know and be able to accurately model how many people are in front of a screen at any point in time across our full network of 10,000 screens. So that was a lot of kind of massive investment for us to kind of bring the data down to that hourly level, so that each screen has hourly level data. So that was a big thing in terms of being able to accurately tell buyers what they're buying and give them the confidence that they're getting what they pay for when they're buying a programmatic spot play. And from the real-time data perspective, from our camera-based insights, we're able to look at dwell time, engagement, eyes on screen as people are looking at creative out in the real world. So we can feed insights back to advertisers around, this was the most engaging thing in your creative. At the 4th second when you showed the house, that was when you had the most eyes on screen. So you can feed that back into an optimization loop to kind of lift your results from the display point. So definitely that camera-based insight and facial detection has been a massive benefit in terms of bringing that real-time measurement through to programmatic outdoor. And at VMO, we've recently launched our reach and frequency tool, which is powered by all of that facial analytics data and some really sophisticated machine learning, and underpins all of that understanding. And then we're seeing other external data sources being used more and more. So things like that mobile location data. So actually proving out, did the devices that I saw within the proximity of the screen when an ad was playing, were they more or less likely to go to my storefront after they saw the ad? So just like Artie said, bringing those real world proof points back so that you're actually figuring out which media moves the needle and gets to your objectives.
Yeah, I think to add to that point, Braden, I think this whole kind of, we've been doing a lot of work with around using location data and mobile data in order to join the dots. I think it's really compelling. We've had an alcohol brand where we were running at the beginning of the year, digital out of home screens and driving in store and measuring footfall. And then when COVID hit, we changed to still trying to target people that like to socialize and drink at home, which by all accounts, I think was most of us. But, know, there was a third-party data segment actually that made me laugh. It's called Keeping Spirits High. And so we had to we flipped from an offline to online to an online, and now we've moved back, and we're actually now using the location data to determine what's the impact of online in store and what's the impact of digital out of home in store, you know. And then we've had a white goods company, a luxury white goods company where we were purely driving in store, and when we first started working with them, we were looking at, you know, completion rates and click-through rates and so on, like real sort of digital measurements. And now we're able now to really look at the goals and the success of the campaign based on cost per footfall and cost per dwell time, and understanding what audiences are spending longer in stores, and really changing and optimizing to that. So I think this ability to be able to it's really exciting to be able to use traditional channels and in a digital world, but actually be able to show how it's creating footfall and impact in an offline world. I think it's really exciting, very compelling, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, I think no matter what way you look at it, there's a massive period here that we need to go through in terms of scoping out what businesses are trying to achieve, and then using the data and the technology that we've got available to us to maybe shift the way that we previously looked at measurement. Guys, that's great. In the interest of time, what I'll do is I will now look at a couple of questions that have come through. There's a really good one just came through very recently, which is definitely going to be pointed over towards you, Braden. So I'll just read that out now. 2020 saw the rise of BVOD, with claims that this market evolved 4 years in 4 months or so. With the media balance coming into a new normality and the legacy media trading becoming more and more a thing of the past, fully agreeing with the word programmatic dying and becoming the standard, how is the digital out-of-home industry is looking at the value proposition to find a place in that new normal?
Yeah. Look, that's a good question. I'm certainly not claiming 4 years in 4 months. And look, I think that and from a VMO perspective, I guess we don't see programmatic as being something that we're going to migrate all of our contracted activity over to programmatic or anything like that. I think there is, there is a place for programmatic, and there are particular use cases where being able to, overlay real-time data, have that ability to change your creative in real time, start, stop, pause, upweight your campaign, just those kind of basic hygiene factors that are plus ones to the programmatic version of outdoor. There are certain campaigns and certain strategies that are really going to lend themselves to that approach. But likewise, there are going to be campaigns where you just want to be on that screen 100% of the time, and you want 100% certainty you're going to be on that screen, and you want to be able to book it in ahead of time. So we definitely see that the traditional way of selling out of home and the programmatic way can happily coexist, suit different use cases, different clients, and we'll happily workshop with a client what would make sense for a particular campaign. Sometimes running both might make sense in different environments as well.
Yeah, cool. The thing that really stands up for me there, I think Esther, you might have mentioned it earlier, is you were talking about BVOD specifically, but you were talking about breaking down the barrier to entry. And I feel like that's a really great thing for, say, brands that don't have millions upon millions of marketing dollars to spend to get on TV and to get in these amazing out-of-home placements. It's something that's now super accessible via the pipes. And that's where we're going to see a big shift in terms of first-time advertisers coming into the space and really taking advantage of it. All right, guys, just in the interest of time, we won't get through any more questions, but what we'll do is anything that's come through is we'll follow up and answer after the fact. But what I want to quickly do is just wrap up with a few real standouts that I've kind of taken note of throughout the webinar today. Firstly is that movement patterns have very much shifted, and these shifts are likely to be permanent. Along the same sort of theme as that is media consumption has very much shifted as well, along with our movement patterns. So the two big call outs there, I think that's kind of come to the fore, is that digital out of home is seeing a huge resurgence with suburban strategies being put together with a bit more rigor. You've got BVOD, which is certainly continuing to grow across all devices, but CTV really being that hero. When you kind of couple those insights with the fact that we've got one of the most unique summer periods about to hit us, there's some real nuggets of opportunity there to start thinking about. And whilst you're thinking about those nuggets of opportunity, also start thinking about how we can better measure it and how we can better provide value with the media investments that are being pushed through different agencies or different platforms. So to everyone that's had the time to listen, plenty to think about, that's for sure. We'll be following up with a quick 3-minute survey at the end. So let us know your thoughts and provide the opportunity to ask any further questions, and we'll get in touch with the team, and you can opt in to receive a bit more content around the webinar and all the topics that we've discussed. So thank you very much, and thank you to the 3 speakers.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.